Good morning, everyone. This is Dennis McLaughlin presenting topic 3, the 3 perspectives of educational leadership. But before continuing, I'd like to acknowledge the work that Dr. Peter Ivers has done in presenting this particular set of slides. I'm a dumbass with regard to this, and Peter spent a lot of time helping me, and we're here at his home Sunday morning making sure this works. Thank you, Peter. Now, these perspectives are about leadership, challenging the status quo and asking students to explore alternatives to the status quo. These are 3 lenses we're looking at. It's critical leadership or critical theory, feminist theory, and First Nations. Now, these particular theories interrogate traditional assumptions of educational leadership. They're suggesting that the status quo may not be appropriate, that the foundations of what we do now can be challenged. Consequently, we need to engage in discourses of emancipation, liberation, social justice, and looking at and critiquing alternative frameworks to those who hold power among our society at present. In terms of education, the foremost critical theorist was a scholar called Paulo Freire, and he saw education as about challenging the status quo and offering change. Perhaps his most famous quotation is, "Education does not transform the world. Education changes people, and it's the people who change the world." Critical theory looks at organisations because organisations attract people who would like to have power or who have power and they want to use that power for one reason or another. Words that are often used in this context are power hegemony and concerted control. Let's have a look at the definition of those. Power is the possibility of imposing one's will upon the behaviour of other people. In contrast, leadership, authentic leadership, is about influence, and people start to choose to change because what's being offered is better than the status quo. Hegemony is the predominant influence over others. You will see in the US that there's a predominant Trump hegemony over many people in the United States. That sort of philosophy, a philosophy that sees people that from another country as problematic, that sees making the buck as the bottom line. Those sort of things are based on values. And concerted control concerns on how we develop norms and values that are dominated or predominated by the powers, and particularly political powers. Every political power has a particular philosophical base. They try to attract people to that philosophical base and use or abuse that philosophical base in the use of power. So we're looking at critical theory in particular. Critical theorists start to study the lived experiences of real people. These lived experiences show how they are experiencing life, what are those experiences that engage them and liberate them, and those that deny them power. Critical theorists examine social conditions to bring hidden structures to life. No one says that they are trying to control people out front. It's done more subtly. Clearly, critical theories align themselves with the interests of those who are being depressed by the dominant culture.
Gina is in the 6th grade, and she's very excited to move to middle school. She wants to learn more about science and math, and maybe invent some cool technology when she's a grown-up. But there's an issue. Gina isn't from the best neighborhood. She's not white. and she's a woman. All three of those things can impact her education and, as an extension, her future. Critical theory is a philosophy that involves being critical of the prevailing view of society. In many cases, that means looking closer at beliefs that might favor privileged people, like rich, white men, over other people like Gina. Critical theory in education is about questioning how our educational system can best offer education to all people. It offers opportunities and understanding of the different perspective of disadvantaged members of society. For example, poor children like Gina often go to more poorly funded schools than their middle and upper class counterparts, and less funding can mean issues like availability of technology or good teachers. Let's look at how critical theory plays out in education and what schools and teachers can do to be inclusive of all types of students. In today's world, technology is a major part of everyday life. From smartphones, or even plain old cell phones, to computers to tablets, everyone seems to have lots of interaction with technology. Except Gina, that is. She's in the 6th grade and her parents can't afford a computer, so she doesn't have one at home. They also can't afford to buy her a cell phone. Tablet? She's seen them advertised on the television, but never seen one in person. Technology is not only a major part of life for most people, it is a big part of success in the business world. Most jobs require computer literacy, and many of them require a basic understanding of smartphones and tablets too. As an extension of that, most schools have technology as part of their everyday activities. Whether it's typing an English paper on the computer or using a tablet to work on a math app, technology seems ubiquitous in schools. But there are problems with access to technology. Poorer schools can have a harder time getting technology in the hands of their students. Remember that critical theory in education is about making sure that every student gets a good education, so lack of technology in poorer schools can be a problem that keeps everyone from getting a good education. Unfortunately, it's not just about whether or not schools have computers. Critical theory also recognizes that people come into school with different advantages and disadvantages, and focuses on how to help every student achieve their potential. Take Gina, for example. She hasn't had access to technology outside school like many other students have. Her teachers don't understand why she has trouble operating the computer, or why she's so slow when she's typing. They sometimes get impatient, and even the ones who aren't rude about it still don't give her enough time to do her work on the computer. Like Gina, many poor students in America have lower technological fluency than middle and upper class students. This springs from the fact that poor students might not be exposed to technology until much later than more well-off kids. While some children might play with computers or smartphones when they are still potty training, others don't get to work on a computer until they are in school. That puts them way behind their classmates. What should Gina's teachers do? Giving students time to explore technology and learn how to use it is an important step that teachers can take to be inclusive of all students. With a little extra time, Gina can become familiar with laptops and really be able to use them to her advantage. Gina faces more challenges than just those brought on by technology, though. Remember that she really likes math and science and wants to do well in those areas. Unfortunately, in middle school, girls tend to end up with less interest in math and science. Many studies have shown that this might be due to social pressure. Boys are encouraged to be good at math and science, and girls are encouraged not to be good at it. Sometimes this happens in subtle ways. Classroom talk can be gendered, with boys being called on more than girls. Teachers can offer girls more opportunities to talk, especially in math and science classrooms, which can go a long way towards helping them succeed in school. Classroom talk can also be racial in subtle ways. Different races, genders, and cultures express themselves differently and react to things differently. Studies have shown that white students and African American students understand and respond to questions from teachers differently. If Gina's teachers can be aware that different groups might interpret questions differently, they can avoid believing that Gina is not as smart or has a problem. Racial and gender minorities also face some issues with classroom activities. Remember that Gina is not white, but all the writers, historical figures, and scientists that they study in school seem to be white. Subtly, this is giving Gina the message that racial minorities can't be good writers, scientists, or politicians. By offering examples of racial minorities and women in class, Gina's teachers can help her see that people just like her can be anything they want to be. Again, critical theory focuses on how teachers can help students who are not part of the majority gain an equitable education. Critical theory involves being critical of the established beliefs of society. In education, one major area this plays a role is in the access of and expectations around technology. Understanding that poorer students might not have had as much exposure to technology may help teachers be patient and offer more time for them to learn. In addition, being familiar with the gendered, racial, and cultural elements of classroom talk can also help teachers create a more supportive and inclusive classroom environment.
Paulo Freire's classic book is called Pedagogy of the Oppressed, and he started to emphasize and explore how power in schools either liberates or oppresses people, both students, teachers, and the school system. The school system reflects the ideology of those in political power. We're sorry, we just can't afford to send you to the kinds of schools where the guys who wrecked the economy went.
Critical pedagogy is basically the study of oppression in education, the study of how issues of race, class, gender, sexuality, colonialism will shape the nature of what goes on in education and shape the purpose of education.
What it's not, in my estimation, is just a theoretical perspective at university.
So let's see if we can develop a better understanding of capitalism.
We don't ever divorce ourselves from the theoretical.
I don't think it's a recipe for the future, as some people, suggest that it is.
Let's see, what's next?
I don't think it's merely an ideology.
Its record of improving human welfare is unmatched in all history.
Critical pedagogy is teachers asking why, and students being allowed to freely ask the same question, why am I learning this?
What about the employee, the worker?
It's not like it's the most popular thing to do in education.
The fanaticism which the right attacks you now, it's no holds barred.
It's an uphill struggle, but it has to be carried out. 3 or 4 kids in one class, properly taught and educated, can multiply.
There are a lot of good teachers out in the world doing critical pedagogical work.
And it's our job to be able to better define it so that we can better promote it.
The educator has the duty of not being neutral. Indeed, Paulo Freire says, washing one's hands of the conflict between the powerful and the powerless means to side with the powerful, not to be neutral. The oppressed, instead of striving for liberation, tend themselves to become oppressors. Once you've got power, instead of liberating, you start to oppress. Whoever teaches learns in the act of teaching, and whoever learns teachers in the act of learning. We change. We critique those we teach, and we critique what we teach. Education does not make us educable. It is our awareness of being unfinished that makes us educable. Language is never neutral. One of the interesting concepts brought in by Paulo Freire is the banking concept of education. The teacher is the depositor, the students are the depositories, and we test to see if in fact the student is achieving. Success is measured by how much the student can recapitulate what the teacher teaches. Leaders who do not act dialogically, that is, they dialogue with people, negotiate, listen, incorporate, but insist on imposing their decisions, do not organise the people, they manipulate them. They do not liberate, nor are they liberated, they oppress. There's no neutral position in this.
Come on.
Who knows where that comes from? Anybody? A poem by Walt Whitman about Mr. Abraham Lincoln. Now in this class, Mr. Keating, slightly more daring. Oh, Captain, my Captain. Now let me dispel a few rumors so they don't fester into night. Yes, I too attended Helton. Survived. And no, at that time I was not the mental. I was the intellectual equivalent of a 98-pound weakling. I would go to the beach and people would kick copies of Byron in my face. Now, Mr. Pitts. It's rather unfortunate for you. Where are you? Mr. Pitts, you open your email to page 542. Read the first stanza of the poem you find there.
To the versions to make much of time?
Yes. Come on. Inappropriate.
Gather ye rosebuds while ye may. That time is still a-flying. And this same flower that smiles today, tomorrow will be dying.
Thank you, Mr. Pitts. Gather ye rosebuds while ye may. The Latin term for that sentiment is carpe. Who knows what that means? Carpe diem. That's seize the day. Very good, Mr. Meeks. Meeks. Another unusual name. Seize the day. Gather ye rosebuds while ye may. Why does the writer use these? Yes, he's in a hurry. No. Ding! Thanks for playing anyway. Because we are food for worms, lads. Because believe it or not, each and every one of us in this room is one day going to stop breathing, turn cold, and die. If I could just step forward a little, peruse some of the faces from the past. I've walked past them many times. I don't think you've really looked at them. They're not that different from you, are they? Haircuts, hormones, just like you. Invincible, just like you feel. The world is their oyster. They believe they're destined for great things, just like many of you. Their eyes are full of hope, just like you. Did they wait till it was too late to make vote of what they were capable of? Because you see, gentlemen, these boys are now fertilizing daffodils. If you listen real close, you can hear them whisper their legacy to you. Go on, lean in.
Carpe diem. Some people make things happen. Some watch things happen, while others just wonder what happened. Feminism, I guess, could be described as a version of capitalism, a version of critical theory. It's critiquing what society has deemed appropriate for women based on them being women. We all can do it. We all can do it. And the other caption says, if I had a hammer, I'd smash patriarchy. Patriarchy is still alive and well in many parts of society. Often it masquerades in disguise. Feminism is a belief in the social, political and economic equality of the sexes. The movement is organised around this belief. It's about social, political and economic equality of all peoples. It critiques the status quo. It identifies those structures that undermine equality. I like this particular cartoon. I brought you to the office today, honey, to show you what you could look forward to if you were a man. Feminist theory is an outgrowth of the general movement to empower women worldwide. It's about emancipation. It's about liberation. Feminism can be defined as a recognition and critique of male supremacy combined with efforts to change it. It's about a change to the status quo. Again, this cartoon illustrates how dumb men can be. Look, kitten, I don't give a damn what you think. If I say I'm a feminist, then by God I am one. In contrast, Rebecca West comments, I myself have never been able to find out precisely what feminism is. I only know that people call me a feminist whenever I express sentiments that differentiates me from a doormat or a prostitute. Yes, there's the glass ceiling. What is
The phrase glass ceiling refers to an invisible barrier that prevents someone from achieving further success. It is most often used in the context of someone's age, gender, or ethnicity, keeping them from advancing to a certain point in a business, or when he or she cannot or will not be promoted to a higher level of position or power. Glass ceilings are most often observed in the workplace and are usually a barrier to achieving power and success equal to that of a more dominant population. An example would be a woman who has better skills, talent, and education than her male peers, but is obviously being passed over for promotions. The glass ceiling metaphor in the business world is a reference to an employee's rise up the ranks of an organization. In theory, nothing prevents a woman from being promoted. But women can see that the higher they are in the company, the more promotions, pay raises, and opportunities they should have. Instead of being able to achieve the same success as peers, those who encounter glass ceilings are stopped by invisible obstacles that prevent them from rising further. The frustrating thing about this kind of oppression is that it is covert and cannot be seen. Instead of being a tangible barrier that would be easy to identify, a glass ceiling in the workplace persists in very subtle ways. In the 1960s, racism and sexism in the workplace were common, frequent, and accepted. For example, even the classified ads listings for men's jobs and women's jobs were separate. However, by the 80s, people were beginning to see that such discrimination was not okay. It is unknown exactly who first used the term glass ceiling. However, this term was first printed in a 1984 book by Gay Bryant entitled The Working Woman Report, which examined the status of women in the workplace. A 1986 Wall Street Journal story popularized the term as well. This story also investigated the barriers women confronted at high levels of corporations. In 1991, the Federal Glass Ceiling Commission was established to gather information and study opportunities for and barriers to the advancement of women and minorities. Today, the phrase is often used in the media. When women or minorities have made gains or achieved some success in the workplace, this progress is sometimes referred to as cracking the glass ceiling.
The goals of feminism are, 1, to demonstrate the importance of women, and 2, to demonstrate that historically women have been subordinate to men, and the key goal would be to achieve gender equity.
The stereotype that word feminism means feminazi, because all of this leading to this interview led to an interesting discussion with my husband that I told you about, where we actually had to look up the definition of the word feminism and the word chauvinism. And feminism is not evil, it's not Nazi, it's not trying to put women dominant over men, it's simply equal. All people, races, sexes, equal.
Talking about is a revolution. Gloria Steinem spent 4 decades leading a revolution for women. When she graduated from Smith College in 1956, women had few opportunities.
We are made to feel that we are nothing unless we are standing beside a man.
Back then, women were not allowed to run in the Boston Marathon or even have credit cards without their husband's permission.
Females are supposed to stay home, have kids, and keep the house clean.
Change. We're not trying to do to men what men have done to us. We're trying to humanize both roles.
One kind of common misconception about feminism, and how would you like to, or would you like to, or anything you'd like to kind of straighten out?
I think the biggest misconception is that we are anti-family, and that couldn't be farther from the truth. We support a woman's right to choose abortion, but we also support a woman's right to choose to have children, no matter what her marital status or whatever.
Yeah.
That's still her choice.
Yeah.
And that there's no term, ballbuster. No, that's not what we're about at all. We support people. And people's right to make their own choices, and people's right to have a good life according to what they feel it is. And that includes people, either gender, whatever sexual orientation, however they identify themselves as far as their gender identification, which can be different than gender itself.
Yes.
But
So you don't identify as a feminist, correct? Okay, can you explain why or explain why?
I do believe
Simply put, feminists fight for the equality and argue that women share equally in society's opportunities and resources. Another version of feminism is called socialist feminism. Views women oppression as stemming from their work in the family and the economy. Consequently, women's inferior position is the result of class-based capitalism. There's some evidence to support this perspective. There's a lot of evidence. Socialists believe that history can be made in the private sphere, home, not just in the public sphere, in their work. And here's modern feminism, where women make their own perspective based on equality. It criticises the dominant order. All theory is socially constructed and can be socially deconstructed. And it rejects claims that only rational, abstract thought in science leads to valid knowledge. There are a variety of perspectives and structures and experiences that generate valid knowledge. The basic idea is that looking to the past is no longer the way to go. We are a global economic world highlighted by technology. Looking to the past no longer applies. Sociology of knowledge. Knowledge was created from a male's standpoint of view and is biased. Consequently, there are sexist distortions which must be rooted out if an accurate sociology of knowledge is to exist. His story should be her story to reflect ignored and trivialised women's contributions to science. Lack of women in academia does not exist today because women have said no to the contemporary understanding at universities and continue to challenge that. Here's the evidence to suggest that there has been a major change in the education of women, and it's continuing so. The next theme that we're going to discuss is First Nations perspectives. How does First Nation perspectives influence our understanding of leadership? This particular cartoon illustrates the prejudice from many from a white perspective. There's a comment often said quietly, scratch any Australian and you may find a racist. That may be an overestimation. but we're going to look at how much racism is still subtly experienced and not so subtly experienced by Indigenous citizens. Here's something the report Beyond Blue reports. Look at the number of percentages in terms of Indigenous people compared to white Australians. 10% of Australians would purposely not sit next to an Aboriginal Australian. 21% would watch an Aboriginal Australian when shopping. 37% believe Aboriginal Australians are lazy. 20% believe racist terms to describe Aboriginal Australians are not bad. And 12% would tell jokes about Aboriginal Australians. What's missing? This 2009 research, 63% of Aboriginal Australians experience racism. 45% of Muslim Australians experience racism. Have a look at the data here in terms of what it's like to be an Indigenous person in Australia. Interestingly, 53% of Indigenous youth experience racism in contemporary Australia. These are issues that schools must address. These are issues that Catholic schools especially must address if they're going to be authentically Catholic. The argument that there is a cultural norm against racism is misleading, at least in the Australian context. Not only was it the norm for participants in this study to have experienced racism in their daily lives, but much of the racism experienced was one-to-one, blatant, old-fashioned racism. It's interesting that many politicians do not believe that Indigenous people have any special claim on the Australian land. I like this particular distortion of a painting. Maybe it's not a distortion. Tony Abbott said, "I guess our country owes its existence to a form of foreign investment by the British government in the then unsettled or scarcely settled Great Southland." With respect, I think Tony's got this wrong in a big way. It depends on what you're looking for is what you're going to see. The map of Australia on the left part of the slide shows the variety and various groups of Indigenous people who roamed that part of the land and respected it. Vicky Roach says, "It was education, plain and simple, that changed the way I looked at the world. It probably changed the way the world looks at me. It changed the way how white people look at Indigenous people." My mum left Mount Isa and she moved us to Yeppoon to get me to a good education at St Brendan's College, Mr Creamer said. The difference between me and a lot of the guys that I grew up with was the fact that I was able to go to a good school. You don't even consider something like becoming a lawyer when you're not exposed to that idea. A good teacher views the kids as people and not as artefacts or objects of cultural disposition. You see, place precedes inquiry. Place defines and supersedes inquiry. Place is a living thing where it is geographically located as an event in time. Place does not hamper, confuse, or attenuate inquiry. Rather, place both enhances and clarifies inquiry. It informs us of where we are at any one time, thereby at the same time informing us of who we are. An ironic cartoon. Black science has observation and experience. White science has measurement and experiments. If we put the two of them together, we'd get a much deeper science.
I honestly believe music, it just crosses all boundaries. It just doesn't matter about where you're from, how old you are. Aboriginal culture is a culture based on song. You know, you travel from one part of the country to the other, you sing a yowie. The boundaries of the land are sung in song. The stories are remembered in the song cycle. And for these kids, connecting everybody together with music, it's a great thing that, you know, we don't know what they've experienced, or we can't even begin to imagine with some of them. So you just do music, it gets them in, and then we look at schoolwork and attendance, and that's what Bundaroo Music Academy is about.
I think it's a pretty standard thing to say that if you're interested in something, you will make sure you get there because you want it, whatever it is. I was present at a few of those midday sessions when young people came into the studio, and just the interest those young kids have with rhythm and music. It was awesome to just watch them beating the drums in a way that, you know, if they keep going, they'll get better and better.
Music was always a big part of my life, from going to church with my father as a young boy. Never really picked it up until I met young Owen Pat. While everyone else was learning how to drink and do drugs, we sort of kept to ourselves and played music. We were trying to find a better way. Young Owen, my yellow. After I'd lost him though, I felt like the whole world was sort of against me. I turned to anything I could get my hands on that would sort of numb the pain. My father approached me and said, this is a music academy starting up in the Roban Primary School, and I need to actually man up, take responsibility of what I'm doing, and now start to make a difference, not only for myself, but then to become a leader. I strongly feel, see, if you dream big, you can give big.
They want to make sure that Bundaroo is here for them every day. And even though some people might change, the ideas behind and the values within Bundaroo Music Academy will continue on. It's been such a success story so far.
We, as my generation, have learned now that to live in this society, we must walk in two worlds. We must learn to adapt to be white man way in that world. But then as soon as we get home, doing what our old people have done for 45,000 years, going out bush, hunting, singing law and ceremony songs, making artifacts, that is the key to the survival of our Aboriginal people. And that's the walking in two worlds.
We can have all the different programs, all the different whiz-bang devices, but at the heart is finding that connection. Bundaroo Music Academy excels at that. I have no doubt that they are going to have a meaningful impact on the way we operate at Roban District High School and the educational achievement by all students passing through our school.
Bundaroo is a very, very positive stepping stone, not only for Kendall, but the other people that are around in the community, but also for the primary school.
We need to work together. We don't want to segregate. We just want to have everyone in there together, learning and working together. And when you do that, it's really harmonious, and it's actually quite joyful. There's a lot of love that happens. That's beautiful.
Here we're looking at the number of students, at-seat students enrolled in Catholic schools. There's been a gradual increase since the mid-2000s. In contrast, it's disappointing to see the number of Catholic schools which report their Indigenous enrolment as 0 or 0.1, 2.9%. To attract Indigenous kids, it's not good enough for them to fit in. Catholic schools need to deliberately create a spirit of hospitality. This means there's got to be a critical number of Indigenous students to form a community mob. It's our mob. More and more Indigenous people are successful in higher education. The basis of this often comes from the success they've had at primary and high school. The graph here indicates that success. I think this is a powerful picture. Look at the kids there. All of the kids are working together and enjoying each other's company. They don't see racism. Racism is deliberately taught.